to go up front, please?
Leave an election now,
Yeah, could you just tell him, don't worry, Lewin has the cat.
Lewin is the cat.
No, Lewin has the cat. I'm Lewin, I have his cat.
We all exist literally. That's not really up for debate unless you're an existential philosopher, which most of you aren't. And for those that are, shut up, nerd. We're real, physical, and the ways in which we interact on the day-to-day are inarguably literal. We do things, we describe the things we do, we have literal perspectives on those things, and definitive opinions about whether the things we do are good or bad. It can understandably be difficult to then introduce the average person with their very literal existence to metaphor, theme, and the non-literal. Right? I don't think so. I think there's something else happening here.
Where is Scott Lang? I've been trying to tell you, he's in a tricky spot, emotionally speaking. Emotionally speaking. Well, where is Scott Lang? Literally speaking! Oh!
Contemporary Western art is overwhelmingly unloaded. This is by design. It's not really a secret that big studio films in particular want to reach as many people as possible to maximize profit. And so strategically, they allow themselves to be less complicated, more straightforward, and due to the utilization of focus groups and screen testing and notes from producers, become even more accessible.
Always so concerned with the human condition. No big mystery, man. They suffer, they die. That's what they're there for.
Typically, art that is produced to sell is driven by incentive. If it's a narrative work of art like a book or film, it's plot-driven or character-driven. You know, they're focused on the actions taking place and the change over time of the people created for it, with theme being typically relegated to a little bonus round that the average moviegoer can choose to ignore if they please. And most do.
What?
I hadn't finished!
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead!
I didn't mean to.
I had this whole speech prepared about moral dilemmas and greed and...
Yeah, that was me. I went around.
And it's no secret that art that is able to do even slightly more is received much more hostilely, or simply not as universally favorably by audiences. We are all familiar with the reputation of overthinking with art as ivory tower armchair criticism, or the film student effect, or stoner-brained musings that are better left mocked than considered.
Metaphors? I hate metaphors.
Ha!
That's why my favorite book is Moby Dick.
No frou-frou symbolism, just a good simple tale about a man who hates an animal.
But how come? Is it a lack of media literacy? Is it rooted in an artist's intent or the narrow expectations of Western academia? Is it embedded into the very economic system we've been forced into, which encourages literal thinking and punishes interpretation as lacking in some kind of monetary value?
Does the white whale actually symbolize the unknowability and meaninglessness of human existence? No.
Yes. Yeah. All that. Literally. This has been talked about a billion damn times, and while I will do what I always have done and try to bring something new to the table, check the video description for all of the works mentioned in here, as well as some supplemental materials that might go deeper into the topic than I have. There's plenty to cover. Art is very much like that. The toughest thing about this essay is going to be finding the line between intellectual validation of the topic and arguing that the topic is inherently valid. So from time to time, things will get anecdotal, non-academic, just be talking about personal stuff, and sometimes things might get a little dry and over-explained for some. Just wanted to make sure I disappoint everybody at least a little bit. So, let's do it.
Okay, last time. This is your brain. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
The history of metaphor in art does slightly inform this discussion, and so we're going to talk briefly about the earliest known application of metaphor. Let me just... go. The potentially first ever recorded discussion on metaphor was by Greek philosopher Aristotle in Poetics, known also to be the earliest surviving work of Greek dramatic theory and the first philosophical treatise ever to focus on literary theory, meaning the study of the written word in its relationship to stories and, by extension, stories' relationships to people. Poetics is therefore, funny enough, also one of the first attempts at literally interpreting art. I only say this because while the chasm between theory and concrete rule does exist, the ideas Aristotle proposes as far back as 335 BCE does, intentionally or not, lay the groundwork for much of the contemporary Western understanding of storytelling. An understanding that, in our current system, many treat literally without question. Let's put a pin in that. As for how Aristotle discusses metaphor, it is in relation to his breakdowns of mythos, ethos, dianoia, lexis, melos, and opsis comparatively light. The concept is practically brand new at this point, and follows what we would now consider to be an entry-level understanding of the concept. That does not stop him, however, from explaining it in a way that makes my baby brain pulsate a little bit.
Metaphor is the application of an alien name by transference either from genus to species, or from species to genus, or from species to species. Thus from genus to species as, "There lies my ship," for lying at anchor is a species of lying. From species to genus as, "Verily 10,000 noble deeds hath Odysseus wrought," for 10,000 is a species of large number, and is here used for a large number generally. From species to species as, "With blade of bronze drew away the life," and "cleft the water with the vessel of unyielding bronze." Here, to draw away is used for to cleave, and again, each being a species of taking away.
A metaphor is applying a word or phrase to an object or action to which it is not literally applicable. That is the Oxford language definition. Or, if we're going back a grade or two, you could just say, it's a symbol.
Okay, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Who do you think that Shakespeare was addressing?
I think Shakespeare is hitting on a chick by telling her she's hot like a summer's day.
No, that's right. Good job.
It is the East, and Juliet is the sun. I'll let you in on a little secret. Romeo might think that Juliet is radiant, or a light in the darkness, or the center of his universe, or just, just hot. But Juliet is not the fucking actual sun. Metaphor.
Weddings are like little girls' tea parties, except the women are the stuffed animals, the men are making them talk, and they're not drinking tea, they're drinking antiquated gender roles.
Somebody tell Britta what an analogy is.
I know what it is. It's like a thought with another thought's hat on.
Now, to be clear, metaphor will not be all I'm going to discuss here because metaphor is not the only example of a non-literal application of an idea in art. Analogies are slightly different, and the ideas themselves, the themes of a work, typically exist outside of the tangible narratives we often obsess over in the West. All that said, metaphor is, to me, the most easily misunderstood, and often the easiest to mock.
Questions? Yeah! What are you on? Looks like a frying pan and some eggs to me.
Now, while I may have just cited Aristotle, a Western philosopher, it should be mentioned that philosophy in the West has always generally approached the human condition more tangibly than Eastern philosophy, which, if you can believe it, folks in the West commonly have contempt for.
To let true love remain unspoken is the quickest route to a heavy heart.
Wow. That is really deep.
Yeah. And your lucky numbers are 4, 16.
In the broadest possible strokes, and I'm sorry about that, I do not have a philosophy degree, I'm not an expert, and for those that are, shut up, nerd. Eastern philosophy focuses on collectivism, while Western is fairly staunchly individualist. So if you're looking for a catch-all phrase for how much of Eastern philosophy has informed its art and other media, you could just say, not me, us. I just made that up right now. That's pretty good, right? Someone should use that. More relevant to this discussion, though, the word spiritual is often used in entry-level analyses of Eastern philosophy, and the ideas brought about through it are conceptually rooted in looking inward, how we might find happiness through what we feel rather than what we can physically calculate or solve. Even in the modern discussions of cinema in the West that include theme, we are often trained to answer the movie. All metaphors are systematically placed, all discussions of a movie's ideas are quickly diminished to one or two popular interpretations.
Jim, would you prefer a nature metaphor or a sexual metaphor?
Oh God, nature, please.
When two animals are having sex, one of them...
And expanding on these ideas, analyzing further, poorly or not, is often dismissed as overanalyzing it.
What does it mean to be red if there is no blue? If they never existed, what's the purpose of even having a red army if there's no one for us to fight? Do you understand what I mean? It's like flip sides of the same coin.
What it means is what it's always meant. We rule, they suck. Don't overanalyze it, you pussy.
Therefore, a thematic work becomes a narrative one. A common event or action used to mean something outside that narrative is separated from its deeper context. That choice becomes a rule, and that rule becomes a trope.
Number 1, you can never have sex.
Dan Olson of Folding Ideas made a phenomenal video on decoding metaphor in the 2018 film Annihilation, and I think his point on the Western public's inability, or at the very least unwillingness to engage with art in more than one way is really potent here.
They are often a form of anti-intellectualism, operating on the attitude that ignorance is purity, that an understanding of culture that rejects metaphor, that rejects the symbolic and clings to the literal is more true. It is part of the process of denying art the capacity for meaning.
This is a consistent feature within modern film criticism, which, taken on the whole, is in a distinct phase where the loudest voices in film discussion are incurious, proudly ignorant, and approach plot as a problem to be unpacked and solved.
Who fucking cares?
This phenomenon...
You are droning on!
This phenomenon peaks, I believe, with the audience's hostility towards metaphor being affirmed and echoed back in the media they consume. The works themselves often asking very little of those that watch it, and even going as far as to mock those that attempt to explore further.
Well, there's a lot to unpack here.
So this steering wheel you sing of, that's a metaphor?
Oh, no, it's not a metaphor. I literally want a steering wheel. What works for some of us is finding a form of water and staring at it. What?
We are being encouraged, taught, conditioned to view art and by extension life through a keyhole. Themes and theses are relegated to explicitly stated messages, lessons that a character can monologue, sometimes into camera, to give those that consume it very little to think on.
We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. It's as simple as that.
I don't inherently hate this. In fact, I've stated before that I sometimes take issue with interpretive media because it allows for artists to, at times, cower behind interpretation instead of staunchly committing to an idea. I don't mind the occasional spoon-fed entry-level breakdown of a work within the work itself. It's just frustrating that these are a majority of the thematic examples that are propped up in our popular culture.
We build our legacy piece by piece, and maybe the whole world will remember you, or maybe just a couple of people, but you do what you can to make sure you're still around after you're gone.
That's correct, Wendy.
There is very little variety in public film discourse for those looking to expand their thinking or even to have a dissenting thematic opinion without an unbalanced level of pushback. And I would also like to point out that even when the themes are outright stated in a contemporary film, that does not always deter literal interpretations from winning out.
Anyone can wear the mask.
You could wear the mask. If you didn't know that before, I hope you do now.
It is hysterically common for an audience to scoff at anyone who reads art because it's already been read. We figured it out. The Matrix is about society. Okay? And now you might ask, with your Western audience understanding of film, I'm not judging, I'm unlearning it every day as well. You might ask, well, how else are we supposed to find meaning if the meaning is not said explicitly through its narrative? Aren't movies a narrative medium? And my answer to that is questions. Who told you that? Where did you learn that films are about the story? Did you find that inherent? Or was it taught to you over time so that it became an expectation? When you watch your Netflix originals, do you find it easy to split your attention and look away for long stretches of time as expositional dialogue scenes with standard coverage play out? Do you find yourself forgetting that film is also a visual medium? A visual metaphor is what it sounds like. Instead of substituting a word or phrase to an object or action on paper, you do it with something you can see. Makes sense? Film allows for you to see things where literature can't, and therefore expands a storyteller's toolbox to get an idea across. Sometimes it can receive a one-to-one comparison. The baseballs are memories, the crumbling house is America, the color yellow is the familiar, while the color purple is the unfamiliar. And sometimes the imagery allows for the audience to simply react to it, and to find meaning in what those feelings might be alluding to. What you've just seen are clips from my own short films. I'm using them here as an example of visual metaphor, not because I think they're particularly good, but because I feel qualified enough to comment on their potential meaning because I did create them with the theme in mind. The beauty of visual metaphor is that it takes what works about literary metaphor and expands it, allowing for an audience to fundamentally perceive something through their eyes. Literally. Not to read it literally, just, to literally see it, to view it and process what they see or don't see for themselves. Visual metaphor encourages perspective is all that I'm saying.
People always ask me, how can we charge so much for what amounts to gradations of light? I tell them it's not about the artist's name or the skill required. Not even about the art itself. All that matters is, how does it make you feel?
It makes me feel alone.
And this is not solely visual. Film allows us sound as well as pictures, so our interpretations are not only limited to what we're watching, but also what we're hearing. A sound effect, the nuance in someone's voice performance, the score, or sometimes nothing at all. And it doesn't stop there. In the past, I've briefly touched on the concept of characters themselves standing in as the theme of a piece. They are stripped of their personalities and become sort of walking ideologies. Their character informed solely by their actions rather than their personalities.
Fear.
These elements exist in a sort of middle ground between literary and visual metaphor because in film, a character can now be more than a description. They are a performance, a delivery, a result of makeup, digitally assisted action, an in-camera special effect, or even just a costume, all of which can lend to an idea.
Gave him a sweater with stripes and made them that sort of shade of green and red that I had found in a book of colors that were great, that are hard on the eye. So that is one of the hardest combinations of colors for the eye to process.
No running in the hallway.
Thematic characters, while not always fully realized people or beings, are an opportunity to create a story in which both the other characters and the audience are made to react to an idea. If we find a thematic character repugnant, awful, fascist, terrifying, or unambiguously evil, then maybe we are being told something. If we feel a sort of empathy for them, a profound sadness at how they're treated, their ultimate fate, their emotions or actions seemingly justified in the narrative, then we are not engaging with a literal person. We are metaphorically engaging with an idea.
Godzilla is the son of the atomic bomb. He is a nightmare created out of the darkness of the human soul. He is the sacred beast of the apocalypse. As long as the arrogance of human beings exists, Godzilla will survive.
Tanaka asked me to think about the theme of the new Godzilla movie, so, at the time, there were problems like air pollution and things like that. I asked him, is it okay to make a pollution monster? He said okay, because the government also said the environmental problem is very important.
I did something like 5 Godzilla films. The monsters became the stars, and the human characters were put into the background. The original is the only one that's successful, that's really good. I give all of my Godzilla films a minus score.
I wanted viewers to feel sorry for Godzilla, and I think I succeeded. The existence of Godzilla itself is a dilemma. Godzilla is a living conflict of evil and sadness.
Godzilla movies back in the 70s were never just monster movies. There were always messages and themes that reflected the time and the world within which they were made. And they combined this so well with straight-out entertainment.
I think that films like Godzilla are like the fantasy punishment for what we've done. The real punishment will happen if we keep going this route. Films like this remind us to not get too complacent, and that we should really try and fix some of these things that we've done before it's too late.
Godzilla exists in a world of science fiction, not only of dreams and hopes, but he's a caricature of reality, a satire, a mirror image.
Prehistoric monster the Japanese call Godzilla has just walked.
And with all of this said, much of this visual metaphor is lost over the years to Western audiences whose readings of the work are less and less curious.
Now he's making his way toward the city's main line of defense. 300,000 volts of electricity strung around the city is a barrier against Godzilla.
As a result, in the case of product films, franchises centered around these thematic characters, many of their subsequent entries are more and more diluted until what they stood for is practically unrecognizable. Or, if it does still exist, it is far from the point of the material it draws from.
I mean, I think that the movie in itself is that question. The big question, who would win in a fight, King Kong versus Godzilla? That, more than anything, was the reason why I wanted to make this movie. And at the end of the day, it's really the most important thing, even beyond who was the winner, to me going into it, is that there absolutely had to be a winner.
Now this is double-edged, because an artist's or even a studio's ability to create characters that both mean something and can be seen as literally good or bad gives them the power to manipulate the audience into subconsciously siding with or opposing a troubling idea that they would not have normally done either with. That will also be receiving a pin, but keep that in mind. It is becoming more and more rare to witness visual metaphor at work in modern media propped up in popular culture. And nowadays, even if the allegory is heavy-handed, I find myself excited to see something unafraid to approach a topic in earnest, without undercutting its meaning with humor or mockery. To see an idea realized in this way, to see metaphor in the West embraced, is significantly uncommon comparatively.
I had this notion that the devil was inconsequential. Minor figure in the grand scheme. In the scriptures, the Hebrew word Satan actually means adversary. It's applied to any antagonist.
Can you make something for me? You want a suit? What do you want me to make? A suit.
The horns are a bit much.
Fucking alright, fine, I'll take it. And it becomes more and more uncommon as audiences are not only discouraged from engaging with subtext, they are being given the definitive solution they crave. And they get it from outside the art itself, from the mouth of the goddamned author.
I'm making films for the masses.
You know, we're fighting the largest empire in the world, right? And we're just a bunch of hayseeds in coonskin hats and don't know nothing.
That's right. And it was the same thing with the Vietnamese.
Yep.
The irony of that one is in both of those, the little guys won. Right. And the big, highly technical empire, the English Empire, right? The English Empire, the American Empire, lost. Yeah.
I will be using the term author semi-fluidly here. In truth, rarely is contemporary art made by one single person in the West, and is often collaborative, even more often overproduced or commissioned, and lately is sometimes even made by algorithms instead of people. Yes, the author can even refer to ChatGPT. Tell me a story with themes about obsolescence.
In the once vibrant town of Smithville, time seemed to stand still. The centuries service lending popularity that have served Washington series, however, the world.
Well, I guess if J.K. Rowling can be considered an author, then I don't know. With film, I will usually default to its director, writer, or at times producers as the author, since in and around Hollywood especially, much of the creative conception of movies hinges on the decisions of these people. This of course depends on the type of media as well, especially because lately, digital artists are as, if not more responsible for any form of coherency in blockbusters, and yet are treated like absolute dog shit. In 2020, I released a short film called Final, in which a male voice recording emitting from a vinyl record explains and anticipates his own death. He describes it as peaceful, and as each track ends and begins, we feel ourselves approaching a demise that our faceless character appears to have made peace with. The film ends with a hard cut to his horrified screams being the final track of the album, before stopping. Fairly recently, I received a comment on this film. And to this person, I apologize. I don't mean this as like a gotcha or as an attempt to embarrass or single you out. On the contrary, it gave me something to think about, and if anything, I hope that addressing it further proves to be fruitful to you and also helps to validate your perspective. You wrote,
"So, I'm a little confused. Was him screaming at the end the punchline, and everything before that, him knowing where and when he was going to die, the setup? Was all that talk about him knowing how he will die just him being in denial about the fact that he doesn't actually know how he's going to die? Is the voice coming from the vinyl the voice of the vinyl? I'm sorry if I missed something obvious. I'm just having a hard time understanding what happened."
The thing about this comment that struck me isn't the questions. It's the apology. The assumption that being unable to read an artist's work on the artist's terms must mean that you missed something, or rather that there is something to unquestionably understand. I think there is, obviously. I made Final with a definitive answer in mind. But to this person, I'm going to echo what I replied and apologize again if it's not what you were looking to hear. You did great. Your takes were as good as any of my answers could have been. I'm sorry. This, to me, is the Western lens on art at work. If it is literal, it is right. If it is metaphorical, it is explicit. And if it is interpretive, it is only insofar as the consensus allowed by the majority, or by the author. My discussion on Final and its commenter pretty decently exemplifies a concept known as death of the author, a 1967 essay written by French literary theorist Roland Barthes, and a topic argued, remixed, and discussed so much that it might as well be the author because it's been done to death. Wait, was that a metaphor? That wasn't a metaphor? Was it? Death of the author, simply put, posits that an artwork stands on its own, and that an author's intent is ultimately irrelevant. As an artist, it has taken me years not to immediately dismiss this premise outright, let alone to respect it, but since I also consume art, and have come into contact with works I have loved and hated inside and outside of its author's ideals, I find myself empathizing with people who don't read my work the way I intended. I don't explicitly agree with them, obviously, but I'm also not them. I over-explain my own work much like a lot of Hollywood directors do, and over the years, I've done my best to force myself to make those explanations primarily about production rather than thematic analysis because I would rather encourage new artists to want to create than try to convince them that there's only one way to do it. And I'm not always successful at avoiding self-analytical behavior because artists are human. We want to be understood, but we only have our own experiences to draw from. So an idea we feel might be inherent might not be, and vice versa. Our idea of subtlety could be a little less than subtle.
If you're called the Homo Nightmare on Elm Street on the net by a million prepubescent boys, then a bunch of grown men have to know what they're doing.
You know, we've always pussyfooted around this. Look, it was supposed to be subtext. All right? It really was.
Just say
Or they might just be pricks, and that shines through in their work. Speaking of which, Tommy Wiseau's The Room is a film that I think any contemporary critic or audience member would unite to collectively demand you not overthink. It's poorly made, and it has a cult following that specifically celebrates the fact that it's awful in pretty much every conceivable way. You are asking for trouble if you are looking for meaning in this film.
You know what they say, love is blind.
Luckily, YouTube essayist H. Bomber Guy is notoriously inflammatory, and as a caveat in his discussion of the gaming webcomic CAD, gave a really fucking good interpretation of The Room. An interpretation that, by the way, doesn't kill the author, but contextualizes it.
The Room, precisely with its unrealistic, biased inaccuracy, accurately depicts why breakups actually happen. People don't fully understand how the other person feels and begin to think of them as malicious figures because that's the only way we can make sense of people when we don't fully understand them. Wiseau tried to make a film about his breakup, but it turned out to be a film about his inability to understand why it happened.
I bring up this thematic reading of The Room because it exemplifies what I'll just call the inherent personal theme. While no idea can be universally understood, we have an opportunity to find the inherent meaning of an art and of an artist within ourselves. I said it before, our perspectives are all we can bring to a work, regardless of whether we are making or taking it. And in our everyday lives, one facet of perspective is in how we read people, our own perceptions of their behaviors and choices, and form our own conclusions about them. Sometimes those conclusions are insightful, beautiful, and other times they betray the interpreter's own narrow lens on life, leaving them open to be read themselves. To view The Room literally is great. It's a fun movie to put on and marvel at the absurdity of, and like many other films that position narrative as the primary focus, it makes a fine case for enjoying a film as nothing more than what's on the surface. But if this is all we have, is all we are encouraged to dig into, then we are forfeiting avenues of choice. We are actively undermining the extent of human experience by shaming academic dissenters for not adhering to a preconceived reading of art.
What's the S stand for?
It's not an S. On my world, it means hope.
Well, here it's an S.
Now, where does this ideal even come from anyway? A lot of it is philosophically rooted for sure, but the aggressiveness associated with downplaying and even mocking non-literal thematics in favor of a status quo. Is there something nastier happening here? Is this one deeper than individual choice and preference? Is how we experience art and media fundamentally rooted in something systemic? Am I overthinking, or wait, no, is this all just a metaphor for capitalism?
It's a metaphor for capitalism.
Fuck! I am not dismissing outright individuality and preference as a motivator for why Western media is overwhelmingly literal. I am, however, about to suggest that much of what you think is your individuality, your preference, is not yours. At the start of this essay, I mentioned profit incentives, how more and more of contemporary studio art is made for money, and therefore prioritizes simplicity and accessibility. The more a general audience likes the product, the more the product will make. So how do we get more people to like it? We uncomplicate it.
There it is. What am I looking at? Okay, it was a clumsy metaphor, but you see what I mean.
A lot of people talk about monopolies in the abstract and how they know they're bad but don't really embellish beyond a standard position that popular culture ought not to be owned by one single body. And that is a good enough reason, I agree with that, but it isn't the only reason, and somehow it's not the worst one. Let's talk about the giant fucking rat in the room.
Principal Skinner, the happiest place on earth is a registered Disneyland copyright.
Well, gentlemen, it's just a small school carnival.
And it's heading for a great big lawsuit.
Disney, if you don't know, is evil. They own a stake in most of the entertainment in the Western world and are responsible for the dissolution of studios across decades and the destruction of lives by extension. They cannibalize their own work, and they have even gone on to cannibalize work that wasn't theirs to begin with, all for the sake of feigning synergy and solidifying a culture of IP familiarity above the quality of the art itself.
We got a full house of people who are coming tonight to eat my food.
No, it's not your food, Carl. It's not your food. By definition, it's my food because it's my restaurant. I pay for the glasses. I pay for the napkins. I pay for the spoons. I pay for Molly's salary.
Sorry to say it, but this section of the essay isn't going to be too nuanced. You're either already of the opinion that monopolies are inherently fascistic, or you're skipping to this timestamp. Go ahead. Okay, welcome. Disney's works have been heavily featured in this video because, dislike it or hate it, they are quickly becoming the face of contemporary Western art. They own Star Wars, the Marvel films, Pixar, Hulu, ABC, all prior properties of 20th Century Fox, and way more shit. There will be times where you believe you are not watching a movie that Disney owns, and you will be surprised to find that they do. All this to say, with a stranglehold over art comes a stranglehold over how that art is seen. If you haven't noticed, a huge chunk of works I've shown that exemplify the Western hostility towards metaphor are from Disney or Disney-adjacent properties. One of the biggest and most influential distributors of art in the world, with the power to shape public opinion on film to generations of human beings, has an output of material that is overwhelmingly anti-theme. The surface is all we are often allowed, and illusions of metaphor and theme are optional, spoon-fed, or even more telling, relegated to works exclusively for children.
You ants stay back!
I don't mean animation exclusively, I mean children's films. Because as we all know, animation is absolutely a unique hub for thematic expression in ways that live-action film can't replicate. Visual metaphor is enhanced by removing the limitations of what must be done in our real world. Everything only becomes less literal in animation. And yet, somehow, our common Western understanding is that animation and media for children are practically synonymous.
Oh, Marge, cartoons don't have any deep meaning. They're just stupid drawings that give you a cheap laugh.
Do you think that clip is why Disney bought The Simpsons? You think like they thought that was literal? I mean, probably not, but it's kind of fun to think that they're that fucking stupid. On top of the active invalidation of critical and analytical thinking and open patronizing of the concept of true deeper meaning, Disney is also weaponizing theme in subtle ways to promote something that will continue to make them money for the foreseeable future: the status quo. I mentioned thematic characters earlier, and how an artist or studio can manipulate an audience into siding with or opposing a perspective that they wouldn't normally. Disney utilizes this practice a lot because the company and its partners enjoy good versus evil narratives where there are clearly defined heroes and villains. Why wouldn't they? The simpler the narrative, the larger the audience. We want the majority of our war profiteers, historical revisionist Western ideals, billionaires, CEOs, intelligence agencies, war criminals, cops, and hereditary monarchists to be liked. Make them funny and relatable, kind to a fault, give them pathos and a little depth. And if you can't think of anything else, there's always children. On the other hand, we want our revolutionaries, our oppressed working class, our black liberators, our casualties of corporate exploitation and American intervention overseas, our tokens of war. We want our victims of indifferent gods all to be seen as evil? Make them mean and scary. A little crazy and cold, make them irrational, genocidal, reduce their once sensible motivations, relationships, and valid emotions to unrecognizable bloodlust as quickly as you can. And if you can't think of anything else, there's always children.
I'd kill you and everybody you love. So they can finally rise up and kill those in power and their children.
He has a daughter, right?
You can't mean that.
The power that production studios and the artists they commission for millions of dollars have, in general, to shape the public understanding of our world to keep its populace uneducated, placated, and neutralized entirely hinges on the literal. It is a practice that has developed beautifully for the people in power, as the establishment politics they pick and choose to interchange with moral right serve overwhelmingly to indoctrinate their audience into seeing the world how they see the movie. And after enough time, the public will willingly assist in this indoctrination. I mean, analyzing is for art purists and cultural Marxists anyway. Don't overthink it. Learn how to have fun.
The book is about the age of computers and all this new technology, but I crafted it without either. Oh, that's stupid, man. So, no motive, just evil? Screw your artsy bullshit. This is a summer movie. This isn't the Holy Mountain. What kind of treasures are we talking about? Like Indiana Jones' gold mine treasures? Or is it stupid metaphorical stuff like the real treasure was friendship the whole time?
Killed by a computer chip. It's new, and it makes a statement about how our youth in America is wasting their lives on technology.
Okay, so is he literally not human?
Yeah, I can just see Tarsum dancing in the background shouting, "Ask me what it means! Ask me what it means!"
What's so crazy, his hands are still like the way they are.
The scars.
What? That f***ing worked? That seriously f***ing worked? Saying things. The power was inside you all along.
During election years especially, I found myself heavily critical of politics that utilize performative action in favor of tangible change. I would always point out that it baffled me that the general populace are so quick to treat politics like art and treat art like politics. The former is treated metaphorically. While people are dying at the hands of political parties with active contempt for them, the supporters of these parties only concern themselves with intent, with symbolism, and with rhetoric that promotes maximum complacency and minimal progress. And as we've discussed this entire essay, the latter is treated literally. We have a very thin connection to art as a means to radicalize, or at the very least as a means to be more than what we are told it is.
Brilliant! You reject your own nose because it represents the glitter of commercialism. Why didn't I think of that? Cut, print, check the gate, moving on.
We understand the difference between metaphorical and literal thinking just fine. We are simply encouraged to apply them incorrectly to what will effectively keep us quiet. Oh, did I say this timestamp? I meant now. Welcome.
It's great, Doc. Thanks.
Dr. Brown? I got this note back from the future and now it's erased.
Of course it's erased.
But what does that mean?
It means...
Back where I come from, we have universities, seats of great learning, where men go to become great thinkers. And when they come out, they think deep thoughts, and with no more brains than you have. But they have one thing you haven't got, a diploma.
I would be remiss not to bring up that god-awful Venn diagram meme. This one. The one that insists that the curtains were fucking blue. A model for so many poor teenage souls in American classrooms, for it was all they needed to affirm their suspicions that they were always literally right. When I was in high school, I did not enjoy the concept of English class, practically all 4 years. I only really truly grasped a bunch of basic concepts in literature when they were introduced to me in film classes in college. Metaphor was almost completely unattainable to me at the time. We could chalk it up to my passive attitude towards education as a teenager, or the general state of humanities education in the West. For the sake of this essay, doesn't matter. What does matter is the day I did figure out how theme works. Senior year of high school, we were reading Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. For those that don't know, the plot of the book centers on the recounting of the life of a man, Billy Pilgrim, who becomes unstuck in time during his experience fighting in World War II. He time travels, able to see parts of his own life ahead of and behind him. Billy comes into contact with an alien race called the Tralmaphadorians, who similarly can see all of time at once. Thematically, the work brings into question the concepts of free will and fate. If our lives have already happened and we're all just experiencing it linearly, do our choices matter? Does anything matter? Most commonly, the Traumaphidorians passively remark on any and all of these concerns with the phrase, "so it goes." We started class like normal, and one of my classmates came in kind of jazzed about something from the night before's reading. Before we could really start any discussion, this kid, they pipe up, they're excited, and they proceed to tell the teacher that they might have found a continuity error in their copy of Slaughterhouse-Five. Basically, an event that was described early in the book, a plane crash, is described once again later on, practically verbatim, except in one description, Billy was the sole survivor, and in the later one, he and the co-pilot of the plane made it out alive. This freaked all of us out, including me, because if it wasn't a continuity error, a mistake on the part of Kurt Vonnegut that somehow made it past his editor and into publishing, then the entire theme of Slaughterhouse-Five changes. If the same event is different in two separate descriptions, then free will is not an illusion. Time can change, and what we experience is not predetermined. We are free. My teacher also flipped out about this and sought out clarification that same week because, like the rest of the class, he was stricken by this discovery. He got into contact with a curator at the Kurt Vonnegut archives because, all we needed was to know whether this was a mistake in the text. And that answer would itself decide whether we had free will of our own. Whether we could unabashedly interpret a book that came out 30 years before any of us were even born. I have some of the emails. I contacted my old English teacher and the Vonnegut archives itself, and both parties responded with so much enthusiasm to help that I was almost overwhelmed. Thank you, Mr. E. and Chris Lafave, for all your help. As for our answer, there is no concrete one. Just spirited theorizing on the part of the handful of academics involved across this email correspondence. One of these correspondents, William Rodney Allen, an author and editor of works about Vonnegut and contemporary American literature, had this to say.
While there's no way to prove this, I'd guess that Kurt Vonnegut just slipped up, forgetting that he'd said earlier in the novel that Billy was the only survivor of the plane crash when he said later that the co-pilot had also made it. I say this because there are other instances of these little slip-ups happening in his fiction, especially when he talks about the same character in different novels. But hey, to each his own, if the accident will. Sometimes discussing an interpretation that can't be proven by the text one way or another makes for some great discussions. I always encourage my students to distinguish between critical interpretations that are obviously true, those that are probably true because they're backed by a lot of evidence from the text, those that might or might not be true because the text is ambiguous on that point, and those that are false because they fly in the face of the textual evidence.
As a lasting note, I just want to mention that Chris Lafave himself said to me in our emails that this entire discussion had him and his peers in stitches trying to figure out if Kurt had done it intentionally or not. Rodney Allen does mention the unlikelihood of this, given that the author has been known to make such mistakes. But in a work with themes of free will, such a mistake lends beautifully to that very idea. Is the mistake, then, a mistake? The truth died with the author. It was now up to us to decide what to believe, to wave these few misplaced words off as an accident of the text, or to chaotically see this as the defining moment of the entire work. An act of thematic intention so subtly placed it would fail to be caught for almost 50 years. I don't know. Something kind of breaks my heart about the thought of all that excitement in that classroom that week. A rare moment of American teenagers in a public school in Brooklyn, New York, as well as a separate body of academics across state lines, all discussing the prospects of an art and bringing themselves to its potential meaning. I think about all of that, and then I think about how much it would have sucked if even one little prick stepped up and undercut the whole thing by saying, "You guys are overthinking it." In reality, a great movie that an average person hates is not itself ineffective, nor is the person inherently wrong. There are simply perspectives that are at odds with each other, ignorances and lived experiences that some can't shake. For it is them. The person could not see themselves in it, and beyond that, could not empathize with what they were being shown. Now let me be fully clear about this. I don't say that as an explicit defense of either party necessarily. I think that audiences could stand to push themselves to occasionally sidestep their biases, their capitalistic, corporate, morally moderate conditioning, and begin to radicalize. to feed what an art is trying to convey, to feel it. And I think that artists who insist upon their singular visions as the work's true meaning are hiding from both criticism and perspective. They are themselves maintaining one life in place of countless more. Both, to me, diminish a work of art to its least interesting terms, and both are a shame.
And you're sure?
Yes.
Just a metaphor, I'm afraid. Metaphor ain't gonna pay your bills, kid.
Sometimes it feels as if we will never break out of this conditioning, as if the ways we view art will always be forced into boxes and linear readings, literal ones, vapid interpretations, staunchly individualist, less and less collective, less human, and hand-waved away as reading into it, allowing for art to be less than itself, and by extension, for us to be. Maybe, we're doomed. I guess so it goes.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The Grand Khan has spoken.
I think I get it. Why, it's the best game ever made. It's more than a game. It exposes the dual nature of the human spirit. The only way to win the game is to be Jekyll, but you want to be Hyde so you can shoot shit. You see, it's a constant battle between good and evil, and Jekyll must stay farther along his path than Hyde. If Hyde gains the lead, then evil will triumph over good, and that's the true conflict of the human soul. And to deny the evil completely would only force it into the subconscious mind, like a city broken into different social classes. People don't want to step outside their own boundaries, like Jekyll wandering into the wrong section of town. He's unwelcome. Nevertheless, he must abide by his own good nature. No wonder the game doesn't work. The game does not reward you for acting upon your malevolent intentions. It's a proposed guideline for a set of morality rules to be programmed in real life. It uses the Victorian era as a fundamental depiction of outward respectability and inward lust. It's a metaphor for social and geographical fragmentation. It alludes to the Freud theory of repression, in which unacceptable desires or impulses are excluded from the conscious mind and left to operate on their own in the unconscious. Or you could just say,
what do you mean? Oh, when you don't want me to move.
What you tell me you got? What do you mean?
What do you mean?